There is a kind of hunger that never gets satisfied. You eat, you scroll, you click, and 5 minutes later the hunger is back, louder than before. You know the ritual. The morning alarm goes off, and before your feet touch the floor, your hand is already reaching for the phone. Not to pray, not to open the word, to check, to see what moved while you were sleeping, what nation shifted, what leader said what sign appeared on the horizon. And the strange part, it feels spiritual. It feels like vigilance, like a watchman on the wall. But somewhere between the third article and the sixth video, something quietly left the room. You just haven't put a name to it yet. What I'm about to show you is something most prophecy channels will never say, because if they did, you might stop watching, including this one. There is a mechanism working inside you right now that the Apostle Paul identified 2,000 years ago, not as a warning about pagans, as a warning about people who look exactly like devoted believers, and once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Here is what is actually at stake. Every day you spend refreshing that prophecy feed without this awareness, the gap between your knowledge about God and your actual intimacy with God grows wider, not narrower. And the dangerous thing about this particular gap, it does not feel like distance. It feels like engagement. That is the trap. Paul wrote to Timothy about a specific kind of person who would emerge in the last days, not an obvious enemy of the faith, not someone who openly denies God, someone who is always learning, constantly absorbing information, consuming teaching, following every new development, yet never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 7. Read that carefully. Always learning, never arriving. That is not a portrait of a pagan. That is a portrait of someone who appears spiritually engaged from every external angle, but whose inner life has been quietly replaced by information. Busy, busy, busy with the things of God, but increasingly distant from God Himself. And here is the part that should make you pause. Paul places this person in a list of characteristics that define the spiritual condition of the last days, not somewhere in the middle of the list, right there among the signs. Here is what neuroscience has recently confirmed, and what Paul seemed to already understand in his bones. Your brain does not release dopamine when you receive information. It releases dopamine when you anticipate it. The half second before the headline appears, the moment the page is still loading, that is when the chemical fires. This is the same mechanism behind every compulsive pattern humans struggle to break. The slot machine does not reward the win, it rewards the pull. The dopamine lives in the waiting, in the not yet known. Now apply that to prophecy content. Every time you click on a new video about geopolitical signs, every time you follow a new update on end times events, every time you find that connection between a current headline and a biblical passage, your brain receives a reward, not because the information is true or useful, but because it was unknown and now it is known. Pattern recognized, reward delivered. This is not spiritual discernment. This is the prophetic slot machine, and most of us have been pulling the lever for years without ever recognizing what we were slowly gambling away. What were we gambling? Not money, not just time, though that too. We were gambling the most irreplaceable resource a believer carries, the quiet interior space where God actually speaks. The Desert Fathers had a word for this interior space. They called it hesychia, a stillness that is not the absence of activity, but the presence of attentive silence. These men and women understood something we have largely forgotten. The voice of the Spirit does not compete with noise. It waits for silence. And if silence never comes, the voice is never heard, not because God stopped speaking, but because we stopped creating the conditions to receive it. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you sat in silence before God, not to ask, not to list your concerns, not to replay the latest headline in your mind, but simply to be present, to wait, to listen? If you have to think hard to remember, the mechanism has already done its work. Here is the reversal most people never expect, and it changes everything. Prophecy was not given to inform us. It was given to transform us. Peter receives what may be the most sweeping prophetic vision in the entire New Testament, the dissolution of the heavens, the earth, everything visible, and his immediate conclusion is not, "Therefore, watch the news more carefully." His response is this: "What kind of people ought you to be? People of holy conduct and godliness." 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 11. In the biblical pattern, prophetic awareness always ends with a call to become, not merely to know. The purpose of understanding the times was never the accumulation of a sophisticated prophetic database. It was the production of holiness, urgency in prayer, radical dependence on God. When prophecy consistently produces anxiety instead of holiness, when it generates excitement without transformation, when it leaves you more informed but no closer to Christ, something has gone wrong at the root. The branch was designed to be connected to the vine, but somewhere along the way, it got connected to the feed instead. And here is where it becomes difficult to sit with because the substitution is so clean. News watching feels like vigilance. Article reading feels like preparation. Sharing that video feels like warning your brothers and sisters. Every action has a spiritual costume on. That is what makes this prophetic trap uniquely dangerous. It does not feel like a trap. It feels like faithfulness. But Elijah knew this feeling. After the fire, after the earthquake, after the wind, the great prophet sat alone under a juniper tree, utterly depleted, having lived so long on performance and spiritual adrenaline that he asked God to end his life. And what did God prescribe? Not more information, not another vision, sleep, food, and then the still small voice, not the thunder, the whisper. God has not changed his communication method. So here is the question you may not have asked yourself yet. What would happen to your spiritual life if you stopped consuming prophecy news content for 30 days? Not because it is wrong, just stopped. If that question produces more anxiety than peace, if something immediately resists, that response is your answer. Anything you cannot walk away from has walked into the place only God should occupy. Here is the practical key. Not a rule to follow mechanically, but a recalibration to return to whenever you feel the drift happening. I call it the 10-1 principle. For every 1 minute of prophetic news consumption, spend 10 minutes in direct, undistracted encounter with God and the Word. 10-1. Not because prophecy content is harmful in itself, but because the ratio restores proper proportion. It reestablishes what is the anchor and what is the supplement. The Word is the anchor. The news is the supplement. When the ratio inverts, when you spend 10 minutes on headlines and 1 minute in Scripture, the foundation has shifted, and most people never notice until the anxiety becomes impossible to ignore. Practically, this looks like closing the app before opening the Bible, beginning prayer in silence before beginning it in words, choosing 1 day per week where you deliberately do not consume prophetic content, not as legalism, but as a declaration. God is my source, not the feed. The prophets of Israel were not informed into their greatness. They were formed in the secret place. Isaiah saw the Lord in the year that Uzziah died, not in a news cycle, not in a briefing on geopolitical movements, but in a moment of grief, in stillness, in encounter. And that one moment produced more genuine prophetic clarity than 10,000 hours of headline analysis. When you return to that ratio, when the Word becomes loud again and the feed becomes quiet, Something changes in how you carry what you know. You still understand what is happening in the world, but you hold it differently. Not with the breathless urgency of someone whose spiritual identity depends on staying current. With the settled calm of someone who already knows how the story ends and knows the author personally. That is the difference between consuming prophecy and carrying it, between being addicted to prophetic information and actually being formed by prophetic truth. One last thing. The most dangerous voice in the last days is not the one that openly denies God. It is the one that speaks his language fluently, while keeping you so occupied with spiritual information that you never hear his actual voice. The noise is not neutral. It has a direction, and that direction is away from the secret place, away from genuine transformation, and away from the kind of prophetic clarity that only comes from someone who has actually been in the presence of God. Don't let the noise make you deaf to the whisper. If something in this message shifted something in you today, leave a comment. I will choose the word over the noise. And if you want to understand what genuine prophetic discernment actually looks like in Scripture, not the headlines version, but the kind that produces holiness, the next video goes directly into that. Do not miss it.